You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network.
Hi there, this is the legendary Tom DeFalco, and you are listening to the Epic Marvel Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Epic Marvel Podcast. This is another episode of Daredevil, episode 14B, the second half of the Epic Collection Heart of Darkness, covering a period of Daredevil from 1990. I am your host, Kurtis Findley.
I'm your Daredevil co-host, Adam Chapman.
Adam, which issues are we talking about today?
So we're talking about Daredevil 278 up to 282, and then we're talking about material from Punisher Annual 3, Incredible Hulk Annual 16, Silver Surfer Annual number 3, and the entirety of Daredevil Annual 6.
Let's just talk about that annual for a second here. A lot of questions that I get asked about the Epic Collections are how they deal with the annual crossovers. And so I just want to say right here that sometimes you'll find that the entire story is in one Epic Collection, and then just the parts are in the other Epic Collection. So if it's a huge crossover, let's say like Operation Galactic Storm, which is 19 parts, there is an entire Avengers Epic Collection devoted to just that crossover. Same with Maximum Carnage. And then if you have like the Iron Man Epic Collection called War Machine, or the Captain America Epic Collection called Blood and Glory, only those character-specific chapters are included in their specific books, their respective books. So you don't get the whole crossover reprinted 16 times if you're collecting all of the Epic Collections. In the cases of these annuals, sometimes only one part will be in there. Sometimes a couple of parts will be in there. And I think of like the Days of Future Present annual crossover. Yes. That one is collected in full in a Fantastic Four Epic Collection, but that's because the Fantastic Four are the ones that start off that adventure. And so they are in every chapter. And then later on, the X-Men join them. And so in the X-Men Epic Collection, you'll only have the X-Men relevant chapters. As far as this story here is concerned, Lifeform, the 4 chapters are fairly standalone. The characters don't really cross over. So if you have the Silver Surfer Epic Collection called Thanos Quest, that one has only the Silver Surfer chapter in it. It doesn't have the other 3. But in Daredevil here, we've reprinted all 4 of them. And I think that this is a good choice. Daredevil is actually the only character that appears in one of the other annuals. He's in the Incredible Hulk annual for just a page, but that has more continuity than any of the other chapters of this Lifeform crossover. And also, all of the backup stories in this annual have to do with this crossover, this Lifeform story. None of the other backup stories in any of the other, like the Punisher, the Hulk, or the Silver Surfer annuals, they don't have anything to do with Lifeform. So it makes sense that we're getting the full story, all 4 chapters, in the Daredevil Epic Collection in this case.
Do you want to jump right ahead and just talk about it? I mean, it's out of continuity and context with what we're going to be reading anyway.
Sure, yeah, I don't mind doing that. And then we can actually end this episode with the end of John Romita Jr.'s run on this title. I think that'll be quite fitting. So sure, yeah, let's jump into the annuals right now. If you are following along and just reading the Epic Collection, you can just skip ahead in the episode, I suppose, and jump to wherever you are at if you want to start with the regular issues. But yeah, let's go with Punisher, Part 1 of 4 of Lifeform, Punisher Annual number 3.
It's interesting to me, right off the top, so just looking at the cover, this speaks to an issue that I think a lot of the annuals sometimes had, but a lot of just Marvel books at the time, and I think Fabian Nicias has talked about this on his Twitter before, is that there's so much text that's front-loaded on here, but it all kind of works apart from each other. Like you have the Marvel annual logo. Obviously, you have the price and you have the how many pages, which is a big deal because it is such a thick annual. Then you've got the fact that it's Lifeform Part 1 of 4, so letting you know that, oh, wait, you're going to need to pick up other books. And then, again, a bunch of different, like, kind of micro, Alone, Death by Lifeform, Punisher's Arsenal entries, more Punisher's fighting tips, and more. And it's like, so much of it is, like, in different types of boxes, different fonts. It makes it look very busy.
Yeah, it's kind of a mess. I know that what they're trying to do is like really sell you that there is a ton of content out here and that the cover image alone doesn't really describe the full extent of this annual. But yeah, you're right. It's like the yellow boxes, I think, are all supposed to go together. So it's like part 1 of 4 and more. There's more in this issue. Punisher's fighting tips, Punisher's Arsenal entries, and more. But they're spread out so oddly over the course of the cover that you don't read them together.
No.
And what's this micro Alone bubble right in here?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
What's interesting about it is that if you think about it in the context of comics, it seems bizarre to us. But if this was just a magazine, yeah, okay, they do that all the time. Like it's just something about how we've been trained with comic books as a form that having it like this seems so foreign to us. Yet if you picked up like like a Maxim or a Cosmo or something like that, like this is what they would be like.
That's very true. And I think especially nowadays we treat the covers as masterpieces of works of art, whereas this one is definitely giving off that magazine vibe. You're right when you say that. Like you think about any of those ones you see at the checkout stand, how they just are front loaded with so much just random text to let you know what's inside the issue.
For sure. They need you to buy it. And like if something like this, it's 64 pages. I guess it's a sense of, it's also kind of a signpost for people to know that it's not just one story. You're going to get more, like you're going to get different narratives, different stories, different things. And I guess, again, that could be more of an enticement. If you only have $2, maybe this is where you want to spend your $2.
It's interesting, though, if you look at the other covers to this crossover, Silver Surfer has no extra copy on it. Daredevil has no extra copy on it. It says Daredevil versus a man-made Night Stalker. So it is relevant to the main story. And then the Hulk one has one box that just says, hey, there's 2 other stories in here, one about Doc Samson and She-Hulk. That makes sense.
For sure.
It's really just the
much
Punisher.
More effective.
It's just the Punisher one. And I'm going to guess, I don't know who the editor of this whole, I mean, Don Daly is the editor of this one story, but I don't know if he's the editor of the annual itself, because it's the editor who would be in charge of making the cover and putting the copy on the cover.
True.
Okay, on with the story.
Yes. So I think in terms of narrative, the Punishers is probably the most straightforward generally.
Yeah.
That you have someone breaking into Programma to steal something. It almost goes off without a hitch, but then he does get surprised. A fight ensues, and he ends up being exposed to this weaponized agent. Without really realizing what was happening, but knowing that his dad will fix it up. Although at the time I wasn't sure if Pop was like some other word or code. I didn't realize it was actually going to be his dad.
Yeah, I found that confusing actually. The all of the players that were introduced to in the middle here, or at the beginning here, I couldn't quite keep them straight. I had to really pay attention to who was who, because we have not only this one guy who gets exposed, and then he shows up later and he's already deformed, and I actually didn't clue in that it was the same person.
Oh yeah, it's not the most clear, because when you're at AIM, you're almost like, who are we following when they're at AIM?
Yeah.
We know the Punisher's there, but who else are we talking to?
And then it switches scenes to the father and the daughter, and I didn't realize that they were talking about the same person until the guy busts in the window and says, "Hey, Dad, it's me." And then I started putting it all together. But I felt like the storytelling at the beginning was a little bit confusing in terms of who the good guys were, who the bad guys were, or anything like that.
I actually think that might have been a deliberate choice.
Maybe.
Because, to kind of add an extra level, like you're trying to kind of figure out what's going on, like what are the connections here? Because I think without that kind of, quote unquote reveal, or that kind of slowly kind of coming together, I don't know if it works as well. In fact, a lot of the most interesting thing with this, with Lifeform's kind of his past is not even in this issue. It's 2 issues from now in Incredible Hulk, where you get a lot more of a sense of who this guy actually was as a character, which I appreciated by the time we got there.
True.
Because he was kind of used as a cipher, right? Like, we were kind of meant to maybe pity him because he really wanted his dad's approval, but like we didn't really know what was going on there. And it was a lot more interesting and no surprise, Peter David opens up the hood and tells you everything about this guy's, psyche.
Yeah, that's a good point. That actually makes sense. I did enjoy this issue, actually, because it had a lot of mystery, and I do like Mike Barron's writing on Punisher. I've only kind of recently, because of this podcast, started reading his work, and I've quite enjoyed it. And so the action and the way that the Punisher deals with this, like, he got a tip at the very beginning here that AIM is working on biological weapons. And of course, this is going to be something that Punisher is going to check out. And it just, like you said, it starts small. It starts very street level. And Punisher is the perfect place for this place to begin. And you think about it, like the last chapter is Silver Surfer. It's going to go in a very different direction. But I love the tone and the way that this one comes off. I just think the storytelling at the beginning was maybe not as strong as I would have wanted it to be.
Yeah, it's very interesting reading, Punisher of this era. I haven't obviously read nearly as much as you have, but I mean, like he's not what we would eventually kind of get in the 2000s when he went like Uber Street level, almost too much. Like he's still in the uniform, still with the giant boots, like. There's still more of a comic booky sensibility, but it's still pretty dark. And again, what keeps striking me about reading these volumes of Daredevil is that this is 1990. And like, I'm like, how did this stuff get past the code? There's a lot of brutal violence. And I'm just like, whoa.
Yeah, I think they didn't really pay attention to the code, or the code didn't pay attention to them at this point.
Because we see some stuff with the Punisher here, there's gutting, when you have Georgie at the beginning, when he's first breaking in, I mean, like they kind of show it off panel, but you still see that there's blood and guts, and what just happened. Like there's not a lot of, imagination drawn here. Like you see the guy with the switchblade as the guy's on top of him, and then you see that there's just blood gushing out of him. I guess it's not red, so technically it's not as, bloody, but
right.
It's still something.
Well, if you go to page 358, when George busts into the room there, Punisher in the middle panel there shoots him in the face point blank, like 4 times. You see blam, blam, blam. And that's pretty brutally violent. This is our hero, the hero of the book, doing this to this guy. And you're right. It's very, very violent for the time.
It is easier to get around monsters because at this point, like, he's not really human. He looks like a monster.
Yeah.
So if you're quickly kind of going through it, if you're a comic code, I can't imagine the Comics Code Authority was a very large body. So I'm sure it was like a couple people reading thousands of comics and like, okay, well, it's a monster, so that's probably fine.
Right. Yeah. If you actually read it, there is this is this guy's son. Punisher just shot the guy's son in the face right in front of him. It's pretty brutal.
I would say that, as you said, like this is probably the breeziest of the 4 chapters. I think it probably has the best sense of pacing in terms of, having a very clear narrative. I think it's in the other issues where, it kind of goes all over the place. It's still enjoyable for the most part, but again, it's not quite as clean and smooth. And a lot of weirder stuff happens.
It's very interesting when you think about these 4 chapters. They are actually written, with the exception of Daredevil, they're all written by the regular series writers at the time. So this one being written by Mike Barron, it definitely feels exactly like a contemporary Punisher comic of the time. And when you go over to the Hulk one, that feels like a Peter David Hulk story. But then the Daredevil issue is very different. It's written by Gregory Wright, and it's very different because it follows the narrative of Phil Urich, and there's a lot more exposition and kind of jumping around. So you want to move on to the next chapter here?
Sure. It is interesting because didn't Gregory Wright write the other annual too? Like, is he the Daredevil annual guy?
He kind of is. He wrote a bunch of these annuals, and he also wrote the annual that we covered in the Fall from Grace episode. And Gregory Wright actually wrote the story in Root of Evil where Daredevil goes underground and meets that old weird Kingpin character.
Oh, yeah.
That's all Gregory Wright. So he is a Daredevil writer. He's written a lot for DD, but at the time, he's not the regular writer. He's Ann Nocenti.
So interesting. And it's interesting to connect. Like, I'm curious what the thought process was with Macchio, because I mean, this wouldn't have been out of nowhere. They obviously would have been planning the annuals, and yet this kind of, we don't know where this takes place for Daredevil. Like, this is not, and I don't even think there's like a specific kind of narrative device like before where they were like, oh, this is earlier, this is before. We just kind of have to piece it out ourselves. But I mean, this is not the Daredevil you've been reading for like a year at this point.
Which is also different because the Incredible Hulk story is firmly in a very specific era for the Hulk. And
very specific.
Silver Surfer is even making references to things that are happening in his title at the time. But this Daredevil is, he's back in Hell's Kitchen, and talking to Phil Urich and stuff. It's not at all, it's not in continuity.
No, and we don't even know, like, I mean, they don't, like, we even see Matt a little bit, and we're like, well, where is Matt at this point? Like, he's got it, like, he looks like he's dressing better. Like, I'm just not sure when and where this is. It's just confusing. I mean, we probably shouldn't think so hard about it, but especially when you read it in a chronological collection like this, you're just like, wait, what?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that really sets this story kind of apart from everything else we've been talking about. And you know what? Maybe we should have talked about this after, because if people are listening to our podcast episodes, Daredevil is battling Mephisto, and then we take a break for Lifeform, and then we're back with Mephisto again.
Right?
Whatever, it's fine. We can jump around.
It is ostensibly a Ben Urich story. He's chasing a lead. This is probably the most heartless we've seen Ben Urich too. Like, it's weird that, like, I mean, obviously he always wants the story, but he always is he's still a human being first, and here it feels like he prioritizes the story more, and it's weird. There's a lot of, like, Gregory Wright is using a lot of what Nocenti had planted in Hell's Kitchen, though. Like, we got the Wild Boys, we got the kids, like, we have a lot of the regular players, so it's not like it's completely foreign in terms of what Daredevil's doing. It's just not what was happening at the time. And all the stories do kind of, they're separate stories, but they all have the common thread of this monster. It's weird because, some of the how continuity kind of fits all together is not perfect, but once you read them all, you can kind of, decide where they all place. And they are interesting. And I do like the Wild Boys story. The Typhoid Mary story is kind of the weirdest.
Yeah. So this is interesting. So let's just talk about the main story for a second here. It's called Predator, and we thought that the Lifeform died at the end of the Punisher annual, but he's actually still alive, and he's mutating more. And now in this issue, he finds that he needs to feast on human flesh in order to stay strong. He's got this hunger. And so this is a very dark kind of a story for Daredevil. This creature is lurking in the alleys and stuff, and that's where he encounters the Wild Boys, and we get that Wild Boys kind of fight and stuff, and we also get to it sets up all of the stories, all of the plot lines in this first story, set up all of the backup stories that are in this annual here. So we see the police officer touching the arm that got blown off of Lifeform, and that's going to play up later. And we see also that this Lifeform, it's sort of like a symbiotic relationship where the Lifeform that is the virus that's mutating this guy is now starting to talk to him. So George, who's the man who's being mutated, he's having this internal dialogue with Lifeform, and they're at odds, and Lifeform's trying to control him. And that's why he meets up with Mary later, because Mary has that schizophrenia as well. And so they kind of have this kind of kindred spirit moment later. But that's in a second. We'll get to that in a second. We also are introduced to the guy who's going to kind of provide some sort of a like a cure, I guess, or something like that. His name is Lamar. He's an AIM scientist who's kind of a little bit of a whistleblower, and he contacts Urich. And Urich and Lamar, these are the characters that carry over into the Incredible Hulk chapter, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Mm-hmm. A quick comment about the idea that this main story kind of ends up dovetailing into the other backups. Again, this is something that Gregory Wright did with the last annual we talked about in this book.
That's right.
They all had a connection. Something would happen, and then we would see. Someone was talking about something elsewhere, or they'd overhear something, and then we'd kind of switch to that in the next story. So he's doing a lot of that, which I got to say, if you're going to write an annual, kind of the way to do it, right?
Totally. I think it's great.
You're getting separate stories, but they all take place on like the same night or using the same characters, and they're similar, concepts, and it feels much more natural than just throwing a bunch of stories all together.
And that's why we get it here in the Daredevil Epic Collection. We don't get any of the backup stories from any of the other three annuals because they don't relate. But because these ones do, here we are. I love the Fat Boys story. It's just kind of a fun little story. Darla dares 8-Ball to go and steal a skateboard from a rival gang. And they just kind of have this kind of a fun little moment here. And then they meet Lifeform in an alley. and almost die and almost get caught by the other rival gang, and then Daredevil comes and saves. And I like how Daredevil is he's sort of like a mentor to these kids. The kids are they definitely are a gang, and they act like kids and stuff, and they do stuff like stealing and whatever, but especially 8-Ball keeps saying, man, how come I'm always messing up? I'm always doing the wrong thing. I always get in trouble. I don't mean to. And Daredevil treats them like, like he's their mentor or something like that. He says, it's called growing up, learn from it, and return that board to the tunnel teens. And then he takes off and says, and lying is not a way to impress girls. I love that line as well. He gets all embarrassed.
It's funny, on that page 405, I felt like, well, first of all, the first panel with Daredevil kind of standing with his arms, that's obviously to emulate the classic logo for Daredevil.
Yep, the corner box, you mean?
Yeah, the corner box. But also in the fourth panel, the last panel on that page, that just looks like a Gene Colan face.
Yeah.
There's something about this page. If you'd said that Gene Colan did it, I would have been like, yeah, kind of.
Yeah. With the bird's eye view in the second panel, something that Gene would do often as well.
I mean, totally. It's not impossible.
Nope. It's nice. Yeah, I like it. And then the next backup story is called Innocent Bystander. And this was a really interesting one too, because both of the cops who were investigating life form touched the life form. I don't know. They got infected by a life form, and so one of them had to get sent to the hospital right away, and the other one is has a slow. What do you call it? He's slowly mutating. And what we didn't know in the first, the main story, is that these guys are actually not that great. They're like shaking down businesses for protection money and stuff. And so they're not good guys, and they're kind of getting their comeuppance by being infected by this virus. So that was an interesting little way to add.
Only one of them gets the comeuppance, though, right? The other one's not infected.
They both get infected. One of them...
You sure? Because remember, one of them is in the hospital bed, and the other guy tries to talk to him about where the money is, and then he gets shooed out by the nurse, and then the guy who's already infected, and we already knew he died from an earlier story, right? In the collection, we already kind of knew that he was at the hospital and it didn't go so well. And now we're actually seeing what happened. And
that's right. Yeah. That's correct. You are right there. And this is the hallucinations, and the way he dies is quite brutal.
Yeah. Again, Comics Code approved.
Yeah. I like this story too. I think all of these backups are quite well done. But you're right. So this one guy gets away, but I don't know. I thought that he died somewhere else too. I guess I must have misread that.
I mean, it's not impossible. I mean, this could be the last we see of it. But remember, he doesn't know where the money is. So now once his partner dies, he doesn't even get the money necessarily.
Right. So it doesn't work out for him too. So it's like, yay, we get to see the bad guys, the dirty cops fail at their job.
It's refreshing to see Typhoid Mary here in a way, because the regular book has been so divorced from everything going on in New York. It's kind of like, oh yeah, she's still like the assassin for, the Kingpin. It's nice to see that she's still enforcing stuff. Also on these pages specifically, life form is starting to look more and more like Swamp Thing.
Yes, that's right. He does look like Swamp Thing.
And I'm like, they didn't get sued over this? Like,
different enough, I guess. Michael Baer is the guy who's doing the artwork here, and I love his panel arrangements here. Right on the title page, with the right underneath the title, we see these skinny panels that are splitting up Typhoid and Lifeform, so that we're talking about different personalities, and that's kind of to represent that. He does a lot of stuff through these few pages that are very, I would say, kind of early Jim Starlin-like. Like when he was on the Warlock title, he would do a lot of this kind of interesting layouts. And if you go to page 418, and we see the one, like the middle tier where right in the middle, Lifeform saying can't, won't, not yet. And it's all broken up, and you get to this sort of abstract looking kind of stuff in the middle. And Lifeform and Typhoid Mary are on the either side of that panel in the middle, and they're looking a little abstract as well. Like this is stuff that Jim Starlin would play with in those early books that he did in the 70s.
It is a good exploration of Typhoid. Again, the only bad part is that we don't get any resolution to her story, really. Like, she's still kind of out there and still dealing with Mary being there.
Yep.
But nothing really happens because of the nature of, he's not the ongoing writer. This is not continuing necessarily the ongoing story. It's just kind of showing you where she was.
Yeah. I like that they made use of the pink speech balloons in this one again. so that we
That's
know
right.
it's Typhoid talking, and then in the white ones it's Mary talking. And so there's a point on page 420 and 421 where Mary and Typhoid are having an internal fight, and Lifeform recognizes this. And she already recognized that he's having the same internal conflict himself. And so at the very end, on the very last page, there's like this look of longing from Lifeform. Like I guess he's going after the people who are approaching. But I feel like they have this kind of kindred spirit, or this moment that connects them.
Yeah, they somehow understand each other or get each other.
Yeah. But that's that annual. Very interesting stuff. I thought that I really enjoyed how that was broken down, and the fact that it had all those backup stories that related. I thought it was quite well done, which is unusual, I think, for an annual. I'm usually not as impressed by the annual stuff.
Well, I think part of it's just by virtue of what we've already said, that you have one writer writing it all.
Yep.
So you are just... I mean, there's going to be a level of consistency that you don't usually have. A lot of the annuals we've been reading, you'll get one guy, like even the first annual, I mean, at least there was only 2 writers there, but you had Jerry Conway doing the Atlantis Attack story, and then you had Gregory Wright doing all the rest. Now, at least all the ones he did all ended up connecting, and it felt much more cohesive. So yeah, there's just something really nice about having an annual writer on staff, I guess, who's just ready for the annual.
Right. Okay, moving on to Incredible Hulk, annual number 16.
This is fascinating because it's classic. It's classic what we've always heard about Peter David, that he's writing a book and he's told he has to connect it to something, and he goes, "Ugh, fine, I'll figure it out." And so,
yes,
and then he figures it out, and then it's fine. But it's so like I don't think I've really read a lot of this era of his Hulk, so I don't know this Mercy character. I don't know what she is or why she is, but she's, without her, you don't really have the storylines converging. You don't have Lifeform interacting with the Hulk. I like the exploration of who Lifeform was, like I mentioned earlier, which I didn't think we really got before. And we also get to see the resolution of the whistleblower storyline, which again I did not expect to see more of. So I was pleasantly surprised. I also, the Hulk is such a dick here, and I knew that Joe Fixit was a dick, but even then I was a little unexpecting it. But also the whimsy of the Grey Hulk, and him acting and being kind of silly, I also did not expect at all. There's definitely an interesting portrayal of duality, which is something obviously that Peter David does a lot in the Hulk in terms of using Lifeform to do it. I did think it was interesting overall and a good story, but it was just classic, how do we get there? And he just figures out the weirdest way possible.
And I love the storytelling device of George, this guy kind of talking to us, the viewer. Now, he's not actually talking to us, as we find out by the end of the story, but I love that, just him telling the tale of him meeting the Hulk, and then him also slowly mutating throughout the course of this story too. It's just a great exercise in storytelling, and also for the artist Angel Medina to be able to portray this. Right. I thought it was really, really a lot of fun.
When you first see him, though, when you first see it and you're starting to read it, before you get to the fact that it's George Prufrock, at first I was like, is it Rick Jones? I can't remember where he is at this time. It's not Banner. He's too muscular to be Banner. And then obviously they show you right away, but it was just an interesting way to start it, because you're instantly like, who is this? Is this someone I'm supposed to know? What's going on? And yeah, I mean, it's not like it's a device that Peter David hasn't used before, but it works because it allows you to achieve certain things in the storytelling that you couldn't naturally achieve otherwise, without it being kind of foreign or not built into the fabric of how the story is being told.
Yeah, I totally agree. To talk about this Mercy character, I think, like you, I haven't read a lot of this specific part of Peter David's run. I've read a lot of the later stuff. So I'm not familiar with his character either, but it seems like this is an important issue or an important story for Mercy, because she makes the decision to not kill anybody anymore. And that's kind of, I guess that's kind of her thing, is taking people who are depressed or don't have anything to live for and actually just kind of finishing them off. And so Lifeform wants to die. George wants to die. He's mutated so much that he realizes he is no longer a person and just doesn't want to live anymore. And Mercy is not going to do that. So I thought that, I don't know if that has any ramifications to the main story, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it is.
And then we find out a little bit more about the backstory. This whole thing started because George, who's a janitor for AIM, is I don't know how people apply to be a janitor for AIM, Like,
I really wonder.
Do you give it a resume? Do they hire an external cleaning service or whatever? But this guy's the janitor, and he gets bit by a monkey, and that's what kind of starts this whole thing. And he's that's not George. George doesn't get bit by the monkey. It's the Lamar that he's in the hospital and he's mutating slowly. He's the whistleblower. And I love this twist at the end where we find out that the whole time George has been talking to Lamar, and then George is going to finish off Lamar. And then when we flip over to the Silver Surfer page, the first thing we see in Silver Surfer, not the first thing we see, but on page 458 is Lamar being finished off. And in fact, he's actually being absorbed into life form. And life form starts absorbing a whole bunch of different people in the hospital. And now he's like disgusting. And the way that Ron Lim draws him now is like you can see all the organs on the outside of his body and stuff. It's pretty grotesque.
Yeah.
So this one I made mention that Silver Surfer references stuff right in his own series that's happening at the time. And so at this point, Thanos just died, and Silver Surfer has come to update the Avengers file saying, hey, Cap, can you just make a note that Thanos is dead? This is a fascinating part of the Avengers history or the way Avengers works that you don't normally think about. It's like, yeah, you got to update your computers when stuff like this happens. And if it happens in outer space, someone has to go back and tell the Avengers that it happened.
Yeah, it felt weird.
I mean, it was definitely just a device in order to get Silver Surfer back to Earth because he's not usually on Earth in his title at the time.
Well, yeah, no, for sure. And it's not the only time that's something that, kind of happens in this issue like that, because although I do like that we get a close-up on the file name Thanos, status closed. If only.
Yeah.
But even Mr. Fantastic being involved by such a weird way of getting him involved by having Nick Fury ask him to do something and they have kind of an issue with each other. I'm like, that seems just like a lot of unnecessary world building.
Yeah, I can't remember what was happening at the time between Reed and Nick Fury. Something must have been going on in 1990.
Of the 4 chapters, I feel like this is the one where I kind of not skimmed it, but I felt like it was the lightest read because it just felt like it didn't. There was just a lot of, he's a giant monster now, and I'm going to push him out and make a choice not to end his suffering. That part was interesting at the end where he does, have to kind of make the decision, do I kill or do I prolong this thing's suffering, which I found interesting, concept. But getting there just felt like a lot of okay, yeah, he's,
Yeah.
It's Silver Surfer. Get it done already.
You're absolutely right. It was a lot of build up and a lot of kind of filler to just pad out the page count to get to the point where Silver Surfer actually has to confront life form. And then once he does confront life form, nothing like we had, let's see here, he blasts him on page 474, and then 475, 76, 77, 78, 79 is just Silver Surfer lifting him up into the sky. That's 5 pages of lifting him up into the sky. It looks nice. I love Ron Lim's artwork, but you're right. It really does take its time. It has a basic plot. But we're at the end of the story, and usually third acts are like this. They, if you go to the third act of a movie, it's all action. The characters are known. The character development is over. The plot development is over. We're just kind of at the wrap-up stage, and that's this entire annual.
Yep.
Yeah, but like you said, I like the moral quandary that Silver Surfer has at the end here, which he kind of is often faced with. It's like, do I kill this guy or do I? Usually, it's like, do I send him to get his just desserts or whatever? But this guy is like, he didn't do anything. The life form is an innocent creature who's only.
Yeah, I found it interesting the decision that they had him make. I was like, I don't know if I really like the ending, to be honest, because of that decision. It is definitely haunting because this thing just wanted to die. We put it out its misery. He didn't want to become this thing, and then he's just left there to be there forever.
He put him on a dead planet. He purposely put him there so that he wouldn't have any life forms to kill. But that means that he has essentially just sentenced this guy to starve to death. So he did, in the end, end up killing him
in the worst way possible.
Yeah, a slow, torturous death. Yeah, very odd end. But, I did enjoy this storyline for all 4 chapters. Worked well together, and I thought it was good.
For sure.
So so I think at this point we should jump back to the regular series issues and carry on from there. So we're going to start off with with issue number 278, called The Deadly Seven. And right on the front cover, this one is Daredevil fighting Blackheart, and it says Heart of Darkness right on the cover. That's where this epic collection gets its title, even though it's not one of the issue titles. In this issue, Mephisto sends Blackheart to go and tempt Daredevil and all of the other guys that he's hanging around with to evil. He wants them to all succumb to temptation. And Blackheart, this is the first time I think we've seen Blackheart since that run-in at the amusement park with the Spider-Man guest appearance. Mm-hmm. And he's kind of going to be a major player through the rest of this arc here. What a weird ragtag team of people we have here in this. Like, all of Daredevil's supporting cast right now is Brandy, the animal rights activist, and Karnak and Gorgon from the Inhumans, the genetically or biogenetically engineered woman number 9. She just goes by number 9. And it's just an odd bunch of people all kind of thrown in together.
It really is. And I mean, yeah, it's just a weird group, weird choices. I mean, it's interesting that, you know, we're used to Daredevil being kind of a claustrophobic character. Like, he's in New York, he's amongst all these people, and now they're kind of out having like a road trip. I mean, it's very different. Yeah. I do like the idea here that, you have everyone starting to feel evil and temptation, and seeing Daredevil trying to kind of figure out what it means, even though everyone else is kind of too busy dealing with themselves to actually be clear-headed enough to figure that out. And then they kind of just think that he's going on beating up this man, even though it's Blackheart. It's an interesting perspective. I think the art is so important to making these issues work or not, and that your mileage can vary. I do think that Romita Jr.'s Daredevil, the scratchy facial hair really works. And it sounds stupid, but I mean, you're getting the sense of this is not the regular Daredevil. You're not, he's really been pushed to this extreme. And so you have this, disheveled character. And I feel like Ann Nocenti writes into that. Yeah. However, I also really don't like the look of Mephisto. I think Mephisto by John Romita Jr. is probably my least favorite depiction of the character. I know a lot of people do love it. It's just not for me.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the last one as well. It's like, as I was reading these stories, I'm like, oh man, Adam's going to have a hard time with this. There's just so much of that, the long, ugly teeth and all these demons that look like that, and through these issues, it's like, okay, I don't know. I think it looks nice. It's definitely weird to see Mephisto like that, because usually he has his classic, devil look to him, and this is very strange. But
it's so interesting too to read something like this, because obviously, like, this is Blackheart's first big appearance. He obviously becomes a bigger character for other characters that aren't Daredevil. But I mean, I think people of a certain generation will also remember him from like the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 game. Yep. And that's kind of the look I have in my mind. So when I see the original kind of version by John Romita Jr., I'm always like, well, he doesn't look right to me. I'm like, no, he looks right. I'm just used to something who doesn't look right.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, this is the guy who created him, so this has to, if anything looks right, it's got to be this one, I would imagine.
The interesting thing about the design of Blackheart is that, with the spikes and the tendrils and everything kind of coming out of his head, and it's a really imposing look. But I think part of what makes that work for me more than the Mephisto is that because it's in dark blue and blacks, and it kind of looks more intimidating, and there's just a little bit more drawn of, like, you can't see it all, and I think that works better. Whereas Mephisto, because of his classic color scheme, it just doesn't look right. I don't know. It just bugs me.
Yeah. So on page 232, Blackheart is described as Son of Man. He says he is Blackheart. He is the Son of Man. Son of Man is one of the ways that Jesus is described in the Bible. And so I think we're now supposed to say that this is basically the Antichrist. If Jesus is the Son of God and Blackheart is the son of Mephisto, then this is the Antichrist, and sent to Earth in order to ruin people instead of save them, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're making that comparison here, and that plays in heavily to all of the heaven and hell stuff we're going to get to in the future issues here.
Yeah, I do feel like this issue benefits from there being a fill-in right before it. Like, it feels like JR got ahead of the deadline on this one. Yeah. Because some of the panel work, I think, does feel more intricate. There's finer line work. It doesn't feel like it's rushed. The action panels are really well put together. Even the the development of Blackheart as this bystander who gets a ride with them. Like even in those panels when they're riding in the Jeep, the like everyone looks very on panel. It doesn't look like there's a wasted line. It doesn't look like there's any shortcuts. Like I'm really impressed with his work here, and it feels like he must have had more time.
Yeah, there's some really, really great stuff. And what I love on page 241, the bottom three panels, after he's kind of beaten up this person, his head just lifts up in those three panels. And it's really, really nice. Just you get the different angles, and you can see that John Romita just knows how to draw a head, which is really, really good. And then if you flip on the page there, on page 242 and 243, when Daredevil is beating up Blackheart, but Blackheart just doesn't feel anything, like you really get the sense of the force of all of the punches that are being thrown here. And just wonderful stuff.
Yeah, it's a good issue. One thing that I do think of as I read these issues, and it's a silly thought, but I feel like there's something to be said for the original method of reading these, where I was on newsprint and a certain color to newsprint, and I felt a certain dirtier feeling, and I feel like that really lent itself well to this era. Whereas having it on a more of a crisp, kind of paper with everything's a little bit easy, like it's not as kind of faded looking of what the look of having something on the kind of the newsprint that comics used to be on. I think there is an element of that I miss.
Yeah.
If I pull out my single issues of this run, like there's just a dirtier, scratchier feeling, just because the work was different. It was on a different type of paper. It's a silly comment, but I can't help but think about it when we go through these issues.
Oh, for sure. And the ink bleeds a different way in pulpy newsprint than it does because the ink is laying on top of the page here rather than being soaked into the page like with newsprint. And so it definitely has a different look. And you're right. To see it kind of with that dirtier, grittier kind of feel does change the atmosphere. And I love the smell of old comics too. I think that has something to do with it too.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, you want to go on to 279?
Oh, yeah. Before the Flame. This is, again, by Nocenti and Romita Jr. This has the Pope character and some more kind of, I guess, religious, iconography or usage. It's interesting to do that right after the last issue with the Son of Man.
Yep. And they'll be doing that a lot through these next few issues.
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying to remember this issue because it all kind of bled together because I did read it on one afternoon. But yeah, I do. Again, one thing I do enjoy is the weird camaraderie of this team, a group of people who should never really be together. I do find as a distraction, I don't enjoy as much the elongated, Mephisto and Blackheart kind of moments of him taunting Blackheart and figuring out what to do next. And again, not really loving the Mephisto design, but really liking the Blackheart design.
Yeah, that one page where they are confronting each other, just the contrast between the red and pink of Mephisto with the black and blue of Blackheart is quite interesting just to see the contrast.
Did you like the Pope character, this kid?
Well, I mean, there's not really much to know about Pope. He doesn't really have a character. There's not much personality to him throughout this entire story. He's just weird. And he has this weird power because he looks at a goat and kills the goat at the beginning of the issue. Now, in the Inhumans graphic novel called By Right of Birth, Pope is the son of Black Bolt and Medusa. And when he was, before he was born, when he was just inside Medusa's womb, Medusa started having hallucinations, and everybody thought that this child was cursed. And they were afraid that he would have the voice of Black Bolt plus the madness of Maximus, and then he would be the downfall of all of Inhumans. And so they sent him to Earth, which is where he is now, being raised by a foster mother. And we can tell here, I guess, that something is going on because all he does is look at this goat, and the goat dies. However, that doesn't have any play for any of the rest of the story. That doesn't come into the picture at all. Who cares if he kills this goat because he doesn't use this power ever again in this story? It's like a wasted potential.
Yeah, it is weird. I mean, obviously, Ahura would eventually be used, when he's aged up a lot. But yeah, at this time, not as much.
Yeah. I just think that it was an odd thing to include this kid in the story because he doesn't really serve any real purpose. Like he gets paired with Brandy, and I guess it's just a way for Brandy to talk to, but he didn't need to be there. If you take him out of the story, I mean, that means that Gorgon and Karnak don't have a real purpose to be there either, but he's not necessary.
No. How do you feel about, Daredevil and company just getting ripped out and swallowed into hell?
That was definitely like just right out of left field. I mean, it's how else are they going to get there except through some sort of transportation like this? But I thought that was kind of weird. And the whole thing between Mephisto and Blackheart it's actually very interesting development, I found. And this is where Ann Nocenti's political views come in, and I don't exactly know where she stands, even after reading the story, where she stands with religion, because with her liberal slant, I would say that she's against it, but the way she writes some of these characters makes me think that she also either understands it or accepts it or something. I'm not exactly sure, and we'll get to that more when we get to the end of the story, but one thing I wanted to point out is on page 258, we get that huge splash page with Mephisto. It looks like it's the Birth of Venus kind of pose, that famous painting with Venus coming out of a shell. And all of these creatures or, whatever they are wailing down below, he calls it the Accursed. This is an army that he created, that he rose up in order to take down the Beyonder in the Secret Wars 2.
Okay.
Pope has kind of a Superman origin. Did you find that? He crash lands in in the backwater middle America and gets taken in by whoever found the shuttle, and I feel like this is like, what if Superman were crazy, and this is the kind of the story that would follow that.
For sure. So the next issue is issue 280. So it's Twilight of the Idols by Ann Nocenti and Johnny Miller Jr. This is, it's an enjoyable issue, but I would say most of the issue doesn't actually move the plot along,
right? Because
all the characters are trapped in different scenarios and have to slowly kind of figure out where they are, what's going on, and some of them better than others, so that they can kind of move on from this torment.
In fact, that's the next two issues. They're both the same. Yeah. They're just kind of, all of the team is now splintered off into different groups, and they all have their own separate adventures, and they're not going to meet up again until the end of this story here. I love this.
We do introduce a new character, though. We have the angel.
And there's a couple of new characters. There's that angel. And then there's also Lucifer, who shows up. Lucifer and Gabriel show up with the number 9 storyline.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
So each of these have kind of a different purpose. Daredevil finds himself in kind of a blank world. It's snow, and so everything's white, and so we get no backgrounds or anything. This is really, I think, to represent that Daredevil has no identity at the moment. He's cut himself off from everything that makes him him. Ann Nocenti makes sure that we know that, I think it's through Brandy's dialogue, that the netherworld or hell or whatever you want to call it appears differently to different people. And so a lot of our perception of what hell looks like is from things like the Bible or Dante's Inferno. But that's not necessarily the case. And so each one of these people are in hell, but they're all experiencing it in a different way. And so Daredevil is experiencing it as a void. Something that he can't get out of. He doesn't have an identity, and he doesn't know where to go, and he doesn't have anywhere to go to. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's probably the most visually striking as well.
Yep. And then another one is Gorgon and Karnak. This is a weird story for them too. They've been kind of fighting because of the influence of Blackheart, but they end up in this world where all of the high life with all of the best food and wine and whatever, all of this kind of stuff is at their disposal, and they kind of just ignore it and choose to fight. And we're going to see later on here, or is that in this issue or the next one? It's in this issue. They meet up with this devil angel. It's a combination of the two. And they're in this weird, luxurious mansion. All of the books, if you go to page 284, all of the books on the bookshelf are all French philosophers.
Oh, yeah.
And they deal with existentialism and everything like that. And so I don't exactly know what we're supposed to take away from their storyline here, except for like they're just in this luxurious place that they don't want to be in and they can't get out of. And I wonder if it has to do with the fact that they're part of the royal family of Inhumans. But I don't really know exactly where their story goes. Theirs is the most abstract to me.
I would say that's true. And it only gets more so.
Yeah, right. Brandy and Pope get trapped at the bottom of some sort of crevice, and they have to climb their way out. And as they start climbing, they notice that carved into the rock are all of these faces of different gods from different religions. And I think,
that's right.
I think that this is supposed to be metaphorical for Brandy, who sees herself as... she obviously doesn't believe in any sort of religion, and she sees herself above all of that, and now is forced in a situation where she literally has to climb over top of all of these gods in order to give herself freedom. So interesting visual stuff there. It just weird. This issue is just bizarre in that sense. And then the last story here is number 9, who now has angel wings. She has been created to be a perfect woman. So in her version of hell, she is held to such a high standard that she is an angel. And is this the issue where she sees also like all of these billboards that have pornography on them and stuff? Or is that the next issue?
I think she sees the billboards in this issue, but she doesn't get the wings till next issue.
Oh, okay. No, she has...
I guess she does have the wings.
She has the wings here
yeah.
as well. Yeah, I think that she realizes that I don't know, her version of hell is now that she is trapped in a world that is going to, use her as what she was created to be rather than what she has been learning from Brandy and everything in the past few issues. Also interesting at the end here is Daredevil's story. He gets to he's gotten to a couple of phone booths, and he gets to this last booth, and it actually is a confessional box, which is a theme that Daredevil goes back to often, is his Catholic roots and in having to go to confession to just because he's Daredevil and has done a lot of stuff. But in order to save himself, and here's the real symbolic part, is that he's in the snow, he's freezing, he needs to find heat, and what's going to be the thing that saves him is the cross that's on top of the confessional box. He lights it, and it becomes a fire for him and gives him warmth. It saves him. So that's definitely metaphorical for Daredevil being in the void. The only thing that he can hold on to is his faith. And Brandy does meet this other angel with a Beasties Boys shirt on. I thought that was funny. Yeah. And we're not going to find out kind of his purpose until a little while later here. So yeah, I mean, there's just so much to unpack, I think, about the philosophy of all of this, which I wasn't expecting from these issues based on I know that Ann Nocenti likes to put in her politics and stuff, but this is on a kind of a different level if you really, really dig into it.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, next issue is issue number 281. It's called Heaven is Knowing Who You Are. And again, like I said, this is just carrying on the threads. The characters are not going to meet up in this issue. They're still separated and going along their storylines. Daredevil's storyline, he has this flame that he's holding. And remember, the flame is a metaphor for his faith. The demons are attacking him, trying to snuff out the light. So he's really holding on to his faith as much as he can throughout this issue, protecting it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Number 9 is she's now in this world of angels and stuff. She's meeting up with all of these other angels, meets up with this one guy, his hunky guy named Gabriel, and kind of falls for him. And then she meets up with this other angel called Lucifer, who goes by the name Lucy. This is a very interesting character to me because the way that Lucy is portrayed is definitely got a lot of gay coding to the character. And so I'm figuring that this is definitely Anne putting in some of her feminist views here, portraying, because Lucifer is another name for the devil. So this is obviously a devil type character, but by making this one, a lesbian character, and like the lesbian characters, this person is not wearing pants and has no genitals, so you don't actually know if it's male or female. Could go either way, but which is I think why it has that kind of coding to it. But And I can't remember if it's this issue or the next one that Brandy actually, or not Brandy, it is this issue on 307. Number 9 eventually just kisses Lucifer and doesn't give in to the typical male character, but kind of goes in the more feminist way, and he goes after the lesbian character. I don't know. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here?
I do. It's interesting. I hadn't really thought of it that way. It's interesting. It's an interesting way to read into it, and I definitely I think it was trying to have a play on kind of traditional gender norms, and that the other Gabriel's the more typical masculine man,
yep,
and this guy is not that usual representation. I think it was also more of a comment on she's been supposed to be bred to be with men and serve men, and this is the more manly man, but she chooses to be with someone who isn't that ideal, which kind of goes to your point that maybe it's as far as she could go in 30 years ago to tell that kind of story.
I think
which
so.
is
Yeah,
about a different type of coding than we're expecting.
It's definitely the coding, because they refer to Lucifer as a him, so we're supposed to assume there's a him, but the way that it's visually is different. And we also find out that Gabriel is Blackheart in disguise, and so Blackheart's trying to tempt number 9 as being a typical physical male character, but that's not working. And I really am interested in Blackheart's progression here, because now Blackheart's realizing that Mephisto's ways are out of date. The way of tempting is not going to work. These humans have a mind of their own, and they're making their own decisions, and maybe we should just let them do that.
Well, I mean, in the issue before, you also had Mephisto kind of, when he was talking to Blackheart, he did say you could cheat, which I think was different as well. That he's not going to only do the traditional kind of what's allowed either. He's going to cheat maybe in different ways.
But in this one here on page 306, Blackheart says to himself, perhaps this king and his subjects dynamic is more tenuous than I knew. Perhaps it's time for a rebellion, a revolution that only Blackheart can lead, son against father. He's going to go against Mephisto, not because he cares for the humans, but just because he doesn't believe in Mephisto's ways anymore. This is essentially Blackheart becoming an atheist. He's turning against the religion that has been set out by Mephisto and, Christianity in general, I guess. So that's...
It is weird.
And
from that point onwards, every time we see... I think it's around from this time onwards, every time we see Mephisto in this story, he's now hideously kind of fat and lying down. He's not the traditional Mephisto we've been seeing either, which is weird. It's just a weird choice. I don't know why they suddenly changed his physicality to be this more bloated, leader kind of lying down, and as opposed to what we've seen before. But this is where they go now. Yeah,
it's very odd, very strange for sure. And then in the middle of this all, we have Silver Surfer, who just comes in.
Oh my God.
And I don't even know why he's here, except for the fact that it's Mephisto. And of course, they have a long history together. But he didn't need to be here.
No. I do really love the last 2 pages of the issue where you have Daredevil fending everyone off with the flame.
Yep.
And he's being able to, get rid of all the demons. And you have the internal narration. You believe your evil breaks a man. Sometimes it does, but when it doesn't break a man, it makes him even stronger. And that last kind of shot, again, great line work. You can tell again that JR had time to make this shot count.
Yeah, it's really, really nice, and it reminds me of Dragon Ball Z. Do you ever watch that show?
No, but that's very funny.
Every time Goku is defeated in battle, it just makes him stronger, and so he just gets stronger and stronger throughout the course of the series because he keeps getting defeated. And so, yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting too because I mean, at this point in time, Daredevil had been brought low by Born Again, and then started to rebuild back up. And then, because what he had that made him survive all that was love. The whole ending of Born Again is him arm in arm with Karen Page. Even though all these terrible things happened, he had love, and that was enough to kind of help him through the next step, right? Yep. So Ann Nocenti comes in and says, well, let's take away the love.
Right.
And so she kind of shatters that and his sense of, what he's been doing in good and bad and being righteous or not. And now he's in a literal hell fighting against demons, and this is how we're going to rebuild him up. So really, this is the beginning of getting to issue 300. She won't be here by then, but really, the next 20 issues are all about, how do we rebuild Daredevil to be back to what we used to have before Born Again. It was a
Interesting.
long journey to get there.
Nice. That makes me really excited for the next volume, Last Rites. That should be good to see this come to fruition.
I mean, I've said it before, but like Last Rites is a perfect sequel to Born Again because it flips the script. It's beautiful, but again, you don't get there if you don't have Nocenti doing weird stuff with Daredevil to push him outside of his comfort zone.
Yep.
Push the character in different directions, and then when you finally get to the sequel to Born Again, I mean, it's not actually called that, but I mean, I think of it that way as thematically. It feels more earned because it didn't happen right away.
Yeah.
It took years of a guy being on the road with a weird motley crew and not being in his comfort zone. By the time we get there, you feel like we earned this.
Totally. Okay, so just before we go on to the next one, on page 304, Brandy is still climbing up the mountain or the crevice or whatever she is with Pope and also with this angel character. And she's going through this existential crisis as well. Where does she fit in? How does she relate to all of these gods that she's seeing on the side of the mountain? And she knows all of them. She calls them by name. And at one point, the angel says, Brandy, you should be careful how you treat people. He says, an earth poet once said, be careful lest you chase an angel from your door. And that poet is William Blake from a poem called Holy Thursday. And it's a reference to, like, do you remember the opening to Disney's Beauty and the Beast, where the prince meets this old woman who wants shelter, and he refuses the woman, and it turns out she's actually a beautiful enchantress. And once he sees that, he's like, "Oh, I made a mistake. You can stay here." But she says, "No, you know what? I already know your heart is terrible, so I'm going to put a curse on you." And that's the same thing here. It's like, be careful lest you chase an angel from your door. It's like you don't know if the person that you're treating, you don't know anything about the person you're treating. It could be the most powerful person in the world, or it could be God or whatever. So you got to treat that person, everybody, nice. Otherwise, it could come back to bite you in the butt. And so I think that's where she's at right now. It's like she's treated all of these people poorly in the past. I don't really know who they're referring to by people that she's treated poorly in the past. But that's the lesson that she's supposed to learn here. Okay, last issue, number 282, Crooked Halos.
I feel like at some point, even in Nocenti got bored of this because we don't even get to see the final, like, quote unquote, battle between the Silver Surfer and Mephisto. Like, it's inconsequential. It's not even the thing. Like, she wanted to basically have Daredevil and his allies be tempted and wanted them to come up, rise above and be able to kind of turn around and walk out of hell and not care about, stooping to Mephisto's level. And then at the same time, you have, Mephisto casting out Blackheart. You have, Silver Surfer showing up and battling Mephisto and trying to, stop him from, his regular shenanigans. You have Brandy out of nowhere unceremoniously getting murdered by Mephisto. Like, what is happening?
It's very strange. And then we have this huge fat Mephisto. He's actually eating all of the accursed, which is why he's getting fatter and fatter.
Oh, I guess they did build that story. That's the reason why. It's so weird. I'm glad they never really used this version of the character again because I don't like it.
It is very strange.
I do remember years ago I was playing the miniatures game HeroClix, and they did make a fat, weird, messed up Mephisto.
They did
from this storyline.
Yeah,
and I was like, yeah, thanks. I don't really want this, but great.
That's awesome. I hope he was on your team often, Adam.
I don't know if I had him, but I think I used him a couple times from a friend, so I think I at least used him. Did not enjoy it.
That's good. Yeah, this is a very strange issue to conclude with. A lot happens really fast, and it's like all of everything happens, and it's not of any of the heroes' choices. So they're all in their separate streams, and then Mephisto just says, let's bring everybody together. And so he brings them all together. None of them actually accomplish finding a way out on their own or finding each other. And then, in the end, they just kind of magically appear in the grassy field. Daredevil uses his faith to get them away from Mephisto. He just says, we all forgive you and God forgives you. And so that's how we're going to be free. And then they're free. And I was like, what?
That's it.
Really? And then, Brandy dies. And in the end, we see her as an angel, and she's now with the other angel that she had been with before. And I don't know, did she learn her lesson? I'm not exactly sure. This is kind of a rough ending for this story.
It is a little rough, and even an interesting meditation at the end, too, because they're like, hey, look at that. the kid, I think he senses us. Children can see angels, then they grow up and can't see us anymore. And I'm like, that almost seems like a weird Ann Nocenti line because she spent so much time with all the other kids that we're used to in Hell's Kitchen, and I don't think they can see the angels. So just an interesting kind of hard left that, now she's making this kind of pronouncement that this character's making. It's just an odd choice.
And is it supposed to say that, angels and demons, like this stuff actually exists? Like, is she saying this, but as we get older, we just become so cynical that we don't believe anymore? It's like the whole Santa Claus thing.
Which again is an interesting meditation, because I would say the fat boys are very cynical. So I guess they don't have that period of innocence.
Yeah, maybe not. Yeah. Very strange. And then, so I haven't read anything else after this. The Last Rites volume is not out, so I don't know where this goes. But this is the end of John Romita Jr.'s tenure on Daredevil, right? Because I think this is the beginning of Lee Weeks after this.
I mean, those artists are so stylistically different.
They really are, yeah.
Well, actually, it's interesting. And now I think about it, I mean, if you think of traditional John Romita Jr., probably not, because he's done a lot of Spider-Man and a lot of like more street level stuff that isn't batshit crazy. But this is the run of his that goes the most askew from that general idea. So Lee Weeks is kind of a return to more traditional form.
Right, and the story becomes a little bit more traditional and stuff, and so it all works together. I bet JR had a lot of fun doing these issues. There's just so much to be creative, rather than just talking heads, rather than just people, street level people. It's like there's a lot to actually just play with and have fun with.
That is very true.
Well, overall, if you put these two volumes, Touch of Typhoid and Heart of Darkness, together, what are your thoughts, Adam?
At times a little uneven. It is a slow progression from extremely street level to as far away from it as you can get. I feel like if you read like the first issue of Volume 13 and the last regular issue of Volume 14, you'd be like, "What did I miss?"
Yeah, right.
Like in a way that you're not used to. Like a lot of books. Things will be different. There'll be different storylines, etc. But I mean, there's such a huge shift in tone that they feel so divorced from each other. But again, you slowly get there over time. It's I don't know. It's such a weird grab bag of a book. I can see why people love it and are really drawn to it. I think people generally, and this might be unfair, but are probably thinking when they think of Nocenti more of when Typhoid Mary is running around, and not necessarily this road trip, through wherever with this weird motley crew. They're probably not thinking that as much as they are of the former stuff. But it's still very strong. It's helped out by a very good performance by John Romita Jr. When he's on, he's on. I mean, I always love some of the character designs, but it's hard to deny the amount of skill that's going in here and how much, he's really putting a lot of effort in. This doesn't feel like he phoned it in.
Well, I think a lot of that also has to do with Al Williamson, who is fantastic at everything he does. I'm a big Al Williamson fan. And if you compare John Romita's work here with his work that he did on X-Men just slightly before this with inks by Dan Green, they look very different. It doesn't look as polished, as professional, or as detailed, and I think a lot of this has to do with Al Williamson here. So I want to give credit to the inker, because that's definitely, I think, shaping a lot of this book.
Yeah.
You, Adam, have an interview with Ann Nocenti on your podcast. And
I do.
I'm going to go listen to that because I should have listened to it before we tackled any of Ann Nocenti's stuff. And it was quite a while for you, so I don't even know if you remember anything of what she said there. But if there are any relevant clips, I'm going to try and put them in here. And people should go check out Adam's podcast at Comic Shenanigans.
Yeah, I would appreciate that if people did. Yeah, it's hard to. I was just thinking, when did I talk to her? It was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very long. It's kind of crazy to me that she was in that first kind of, I guess, wave, that first year of where I was actually doing interviews, where again, for the first 250 episodes of my show, had never really done interviews. I'd maybe done one. And then over time, obviously my show became much more focused on interviews because those were what I like doing. But yeah, it's a long time ago. It's one of those ones where I should probably go back and listen to it because it's been so long. Another one that I've been meaning to re-listen to, I haven't yet, is I did I think my third interview ever was with Chris Claremont. I really started out strong. but I don't remember it very well. And actually, as we record this, I'm about to talk to him again about something completely different, his Fantastic Four run. And it's one of those things where I'm like, man, I really should go back.
Make sure you don't ask the same questions again.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would, begrudge me if I did. I think with him, it's been almost 6 years. So I think it's probably fine. But yeah, it's one of those things where, enough time goes by, you will forget. So I am excited to find out if you find any relevant pieces of my interview with her. I was still relatively new at the interviewing game, so please be very kind
Okay.
when you listen to it. For people who want to download that episode, it's Comic Shenanigans episode 302. Again, that's from September 2015. What was it like to become the regular writer on Daredevil after that seismic shift had happened?
Well, I always like to say something glib about that, which is that I was too stupid to really know what I was getting into. I mean, I was new to the business, so I hadn't been there that long, and I thought everything that was going on with Marvel Comics was really great. I think there was Bill Sienkiewicz on Moon Knight and Walt Simonson on Thor, and I think Mary Jo Duffy was writing Star Wars. There was a ton of wonderful projects, pages just all over the office. Archie had, all the new Epic books, and you walked in there and it was just insanely creative. And I think at the time Frank Miller's stuff on Daredevil was just another insanely great thing. I think that I wasn't all that aware with how the media was responding to everything, but from our point of view at the office, there were just tons of pages and tons of artists everywhere working in a big bullpen and wandering around the offices. You know what I mean? It was this is good. Look at this. Hey, look at this page. Hey, look at that page. And everything was kind of included in that, and including what was coming out of Larry Hama's office. He had all these wacky, I think was Cracked or something, and G.I. Joe. I think everything just felt fun. So when someone said, "Here, take over this character," it wasn't like, "Oh my God, something seminal just happened." It was kind of sure.
I guess it's easier to take something on when you don't kind of have the hindsight of knowing this is how it's going to be received later. It's just in the moment.
I think you could say that about anything that about any kind of a comic book run. It's especially back then there weren't. I don't know. Maybe there was one publication. There was you didn't have the internet. Remember, so. If you didn't buy the Comics Journal or one of the other little publications, it wasn't you'd go to conventions and talk to your fans, you'd get handwritten letters, but there wasn't all this, frenzy internet,
No. Now, I have a lot of questions from one particular user. So he had a few good questions. His first was, did your story ideas on Daredevil tend to start from a theme or an issue?
I don't remember. I mean, it's a good question. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? I don't know. I think that for me, because I lived in New York, and these are the streets I walked, I was in Hell's Kitchen a lot. I think a lot of my stories came right out of what was happening in my life. Mm-hmm. So if, I would be walking down the street and I'd see someone trying to open up some kind of a storefront, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I wonder if Matt Murdock, he's supposed to have lots of empathy. What if he was helping people with legal problems on the street, Or, there was people talking about, I'm trying to remember. I mean, pretty much everything came out of the streets of New York. Oh, there goes some skateboarder kids. They're cute, Put them in the comic. It's very much like documentary style, the mise-en-scene of my world. I felt like New York was a family. I was out every night, whether it was in the East Village or Lower Manhattan or Hell's Kitchen. And it felt like a small town to me. I knew a lot of people. And I think the stories really just came out of the way a documentarian will just look around and look at the streets and get inspired by that.
Did you like doing crossover stories for the big events when you were writing Daredevil? You seemed to thrive on those stories, and your Daredevil stories were consistently the best part of those events.
Yeah, I mean, it was really fun. I mean, you have to understand that when you're doing a month of comic, it's like coming up with a little movie a month, and it's it's a lot of work in terms of you have to have a long-reaching narrative for your character. Like, you'll sit down and you'll go, okay, I want Daredevil to really hit the skids and be destroyed, but that's not going to happen for 2 years. I don't know how I'm going to get there yet, but I'm going to get there. So right now, and then I have a bunch of single issue ideas, like I want to confront why he wears the devil's suit. I want to confront, how Christian is his Christian roots. How much empathy does the guy really have? So you start like testing your character with a bunch of little stories. And it's like, then there's the rhythm of, I'm going to do a small story, now I'm going to build to a big epic. So, you're working, and you have to come up with a good story every month, and with a beginning, middle, end, theme, and all that stuff. And so when somebody says, hey, you want to play in this playground, usually you're like, oh, thank God there's a playground to play in, And so it's like, and the way they did them back then, it was really good. There was just like, New York goes to hell. We don't care how you take New York to hell. If you feel like playing, take New York to hell. And so for me, it was, the traffic and the chaos and the stink and the garbage piling up. And the New York I knew, I said, well, what if I just exaggerate all this and make it, like kind of believable hell? And so, everybody plays in that sandbox. Or the Mutant Massacre, I think that was one of the first ones.
Mm-hmm.
But then over at DC, I was just, wrote 4 years of comics for DC, and when you get, somebody sends around email, and, Scott Snyder sent around an email that was basically, I'm going to put the Joker through hell, and this is how you can play. Basically he said, you're rating Catwoman. Catwoman doesn't know what Joker's up to, has no idea what Joker's up to, but he's stalking her, and he wants to find out how much she loves Batman. And that's like it. It's just like one line. And then you're just like, great, as long as I don't violate that precept, I can play. Those are the kinds of crossovers I like, because then you're going to get a lot of individual creativity. As opposed to crossovers where there's like more complicated marching orders. Typhoid Mary, I used to have a rule about Typhoid Mary. If you're going to write a Typhoid Mary story, you really should be driving the reader crazy. Like, it's almost like, if you were going to do it in terms of Fight Club, what was the number one rule of Fight Club? I don't even remember what it was.
Wasn't that you don't talk about Fight Club?
Yeah, don't talk about Fight Club. But the number one rule for the Typhoid Fight Club is, drive all the characters in the story, drive the reader, drive yourself insane, those stories were supposed to be so wacky that even I, as the writer, often didn't know what was going on. So, you said something about, that's like Mary Jane and Peter Parker, and I think that at the time I thought, Mary Jane and Peter Parker, they're married now, and they have this happy little life. What would it be like if Typhoid came to visit, And, it was kind of a feminist story, because Typhoid, at her root, is kind of a feminist character. She's always like, Why are you cooking and cleaning and staying home and waiting for Peter Parker to come home? Your husband lies to you. Your husband is never home, and you're sitting here and you're cooking and cleaning, and she just rips apart Mary Jane's world and makes her kind of think about all that stuff. Because Mary Jane was like a 50s housewife at that time, in the comic. And so typhoid is like a bomb you throw into someone's world, like that. Really, every typhoid story should be a bomb.
So if you're going to follow along with what we're doing here on the Epic Marvel Podcast, coming up next we have a journey into West Coast Avengers with my co-host Josh, and then after that we'll be in Fantastic Four When Things Change, the Steve Englehart stuff. So we actually have a bunch of Englehart coming up with West Coast Avengers and Fantastic Four, and I'll have an interview with Englehart to share with all of you at that time as well. So,
have you talked to him yet?
Yep, I did. It was good. We talked all about West Coast Avengers and the Vision Scarlet Witch series that he did.
That's very exciting. He is a tremendous interview, very forthcoming with stuff. And I know you've talked to him before, right?
Yep, a few times. I've got a number of interviews with him about Fantastic Four, about Doctor Strange, about Silver Surfer. So yeah, good stuff. He's always up for talking, which is really, really great.
Yeah, for sure. I'm very glad that's true. Sorry, this is shameless self-promotion again.
Sure.
That episode I did with Ann Nocenti, which was just over an hour, I forgot that the episode right after that, I did have DG Chichester on it. And I'm like, that's a great 1-2 punch.
That's right. That's great.
So again, if you want to check that out, please go. Feel free, people.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, they're always good stuff. Well, and that does it for our episode today. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Just search for Epic Marvel Podcast. I'm there. You can also search for Epic Collections on Facebook, and you'll find our Epic Collection discussion group where we just talk about Epic Collections all day and have a lot of fun. So yeah, we'll wrap it up here. I hope to see you all again next week when we talk about West Coast Avengers, and thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Bye-bye.